5 people. That's wonderful. It's 4 o'clock. Welcome, welcome. I'm Joe Sanders.
It's not working. Can't hear you.
What do you mean you can't hear me? Now you can. I have to lick it like the lollipop. Okay, welcome folks to another talk in our invited speaker series. Today we have a political scientist. So let me tell you who she is with my glasses. Okay, Katie Hite is the Ferris Thompson Professor of Political Science at Vassar College. She specializes in the politics of memory, human rights, and historical monuments, memorials, and museums across the Americas, North and South. Professor Hite is the author of Politics and the Art of Commemoration, Memorials to Struggle in Latin America and Spain. She and I can speak Spanish together, it's wonderful. She is active with celebrating the African spirit in Poughkeepsie to commemorate enslaved Africans and their descendants in the Hudson Valley, and is currently writing a book challenging the dominant story of the history of Texas, where she grew up. Katie Hite will speak on why history museums and memorials matter, a relevant subject these days. Katie, welcome.
Thank you. All right, can everyone hear me? I've got this lapel mic on.
Yep.
Yes, yep.
Well, thank you, Joe, for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here, and it's nice to see a few friendly faces that I know from my past and my recent past. And I have this desire to know everybody in here because I've always heard that Woodland Pond is a place of retired educators and historians, and I totally believe that. And I'm not here completely dispassionately interested in Woodland Pond, I have to say. So what I thought I'd do is talk for, I don't know, we'll see how long it goes. Hopefully not too long, 20, 25 minutes, because I'd really like us to have a conversation more. And academics are not always good at this. They claim they want to do that, and then they don't really. But I think the material itself, and given the people in this room, it lends itself to thinking about this question about why history, museums, and monuments and memorials matter. I imagine you already have some thoughts about it. And so I'm running through a bunch of images. I don't use a lot of text in my PowerPoints. I just put up memorials and monuments, provocative images, things like that. But before I start, I want to clarify a couple of basic distinctions and definitions. So one basic distinction I want to make is that while I will mainly be looking at memorials and monuments, that's what I will also have something on museums, but one of the things that politics of memory scholars, people who study the political dimensions of things like memorials and monuments, want you to think about as a distinction is that we think of memorials and monuments, when visitors see them, they're the ones that are expected to do the work, trying to interpret. I mean, sometimes monuments are quite obvious what they are, sometimes they're not. Scholars like to think when you walk up, it's the visitor that has to figure it out. Whereas, as we know, in museums, history museums, or what are called often museums of memory these days, those are educational, instructive. There's more of a narrative you're walking through as a visitor. There's something that museum curators are hoping you get from it, and hopefully that you'll come back. That's a big thing that curators are always going for. So, again, monuments, memorials, is sort of what it evokes for you as someone who's a viewer. Museums, it's much more of a narrative, and we can already start to understand why different political administrations take these museums seriously. The other distinction I like to make is that even though the term monument and the term memorial are often used pretty interchangeably, for me, monuments are about celebratory great achievers or great achievements, Washington Monument. very erect, very symbolic of great achievement, not unusual, or men on horseback, right? Those are the most classic monuments that we know, whereas memorials are understood as celebrating something often of loss, commemorating an event or people that we want to remember who've sacrificed in terms of historic memorials, right? So I think there's more memorializing going on in the last decade or two than monumentalizing. Although this current administration wants to reverse that, and I think we want to think about why that would be. So, I mean, one of the most, there are many interesting dimensions of this, but one of the most interesting I find is that even though we've had this huge rise of the internet over the last 40 years or so, people still want physical monuments and memorials. They want to be able to go to museums. You would think that people who can actually now look at a museum tour through the internet, but more and more people, at least until COVID, were visiting places. They wanted to see things face to face. And I find that intriguing, and it makes it all the more important that we think about why that is and how people understand them. So there are three sort of basic things I'm going to suggest, ideas or arguments in my talk in different ways. And first is, as we look at a monument in a public square, say, we want to think about how it got there. What are the politics behind it? Who got to decide that that monument or memorial should be there, what the design should be, what the text says, and for me as a poli-sci person, that matters a lot. Who was the power behind the design of the monument or the memorial, as well as who's it for, which is often the thing we're always asking, who is this memorial for? But really I want us to think about why it's there, how it got there, and what its staying power might be, and what it's asking of us, a monument. Second, monuments are not just about history. Right? When people say, well, why would you want to take that monument down? And because it's about our history, whether we like it or not. They're more than that, right? They are punctuations, they are celebrations or commemorations of particular moments in history. So it's not an accident that we have war memorials that are so important, right? They're often made by governments in the aftermath of a powerful traumatic loss in war or victory in war, to say we need to get back together, we need to unify. They're really about marking, commemorating, putting something on a pedestal. They're not just about history, right? They're about really marking a particular history, and I think that's really important. And third, the thing that people like me really like to study is, again, and it's related to my first point, what is the actual process once you've decided, okay, we're going to have a memorial? What is involved? Again, how do you decide what it should look like? Who is it for? What are the debates? And the more important often the memorial is, the more conflict there is around them. Many of you may remember the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, and all the controversy around having chosen Maya Lin, a young Asian American woman, student of architecture, and how horrified people were by also the design, because it was so counter to the Washington Monument. It was the opposite. It was sort of going, it was very feminine in its look. Right? And then, of course, the response was so powerful, it was so unanticipated. This is a real challenge for artists and memorial makers. It's like you really can't totally know if you're going for something different what the response will be. And I think most of us would agree that that was such a powerful memorial, and we can talk about the elements of why that is, why it worked in ways people didn't expect. So I think the process, there's one very famous writer, James Young, who's an expert in monuments and memorials. He was on the committee, the jury for the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe in Berlin. He was on the jury for the 9/11 memorial. And he argues that for memorials, it's the process more than the product itself. Because so often, as many of you know, you can put your heart and soul into building something and then it sits there and nobody engages with it, right? We walk past monuments and memorials all the time and we don't think about them until some human being or group of human beings engages with them, often in very controversial ways, and then re-enlivens what that monument or memorial was. So those are sort of basic points. Now, why? Recently I wrote an op-ed, an opinion editorial that was in the Poughkeepsie Journal in March after the administration's announcement about the need to restore truth and sanity to American history and to take on the Smithsonian Institution and all its museums. Why? Why would Trump do this? Why would there be a set of executive orders to revisit the story that is told in a place like the National Museum of African American History and Culture, or the National Portrait Gallery? Any initial thoughts about why? Have any of y'all visited the National Museum of African American History and Culture?
Yeah.
Great. Oh, open it up? All right, well, we can save it. We can save that, so the fact that the Trump administration and Trump himself called this it's too woke as a museum, a woke ideology in this museum. It's a museum that we can go on and on, but it was founded in 2016 or opened in 2016, and since 2016 there have been about 13 million visitors to that museum. People don't unsee what they see in that museum. Or in the National Portrait Gallery, this is part of the Museum of African American History and Culture, some of the very powerful features. And then in the National Portrait Gallery, there's a man, Rigoberto Gonzalez, who I'm interested in his work because he's from South Texas, and his portraits that were in the gallery also caught the ire of this administration because he was looking at refugees crossing the border from Mexico. Very powerful, and they were removed. And then, of course, the head of the National Portrait Gallery is no longer the head. So it's been a part of what is called Project 2025, right? But, and again, we could talk also about the attack on the universities. That's something, of course, I'm very interested in, invested in, though for now we'll stick to why this might be. And I guess my conclusion, or maybe not a conclusion, but I would posit that a lot of the reason that the administration is so concerned with museums like the National Museum of African American History and Culture and the National Portrait Gallery that shows people of color or the realities of people trying to cross in for better lives in the United States. It has portraits of gender-neutral folks, and it's upending certain traditional representations. Why would they be upset for that? I mean, I think they really saw that those are fairly recent additions to our history in terms of their representation in the Smithsonian institutions. And they came out of social movements in the United States. They came from a grassroots movement, probably the most obvious, spearheaded by Black Lives Matter, starting in 2014 and into 2016, and then certainly into 2020. And those who are finally saying, look, having these Confederate monuments elevated, what do they say to me if Confederate monuments are all over the South and in the North, and at Gettysburg, which I know is just over the Mason-Dixon line. And they're recent. It's a very intentional symbolic narrative that is told about these Confederate monuments, which, again, I can't speak as a Black person. I was never in the position of having to feel. I never thought about the Confederate monuments, and I grew up in Texas, and there were a lot of them, right, as well as other things. But they were connecting the dots. Black Lives Matter was connecting the dots between the legacy of centuries of enslavement and histories of racial terror and segregation and discrimination to mass incarceration. And they had a big movement. They've had a big movement all over the country, and it has affected a lot of people, a lot of young people. So I think that a lot of it came out of what Princeton historian Carol Anderson termed white rage. White rage, real nervousness about this uprising of protesters of color and allies and people like me doing soul searching. And she said that white rage is that fear and that anger, and that often, until recently, it's been less explicit. There's a practice of what she calls gaslighting, of even though we can see the most white nationalist instances, both historically and recently, most of white rage is not expressed like this, was her argument. It's much more subtle, so that when you have, it's much more subtle. So when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014, the focus was on all the anger and the looting of Ferguson and not on the criminality itself. And Carol Anderson says, that's a form of gaslighting, of never coming to terms with what this costs America. So we see all of these protests around the country and a demand that the symbolic narrative of how we understand what America was and what it is change. So that happened with young people all over, and people connecting the dots across different kinds of struggle, whether it's indigenous people, whether, I've spent time in South Texas, it finally hit me. I've spent time with generations of ethnic Mexicans whose families actually really did have the border across them. I visited, the museum in Matamoros, Mexico, that used to be a fort. It was trying to keep the Anglos out of Mexico at the time, 1830, 1832. And none of us learn this. We don't learn about that history and what it says. It doesn't, that there is no clean history of the world. But what it costs us to be ignorant about it is tremendous. Here you see indigenous activists, and while the American Indian movement has been comparatively smaller than, say, Black Lives Matter, it's been very important also as saying, genocide happened here, folks, in the United States. It's not unique, right? And that's been a very important demand. So they have taken down Junipero Serra, who was known as, a famous Spanish missionary, but also a major supporter of enslaving indigenous people. Right? So all these symbols matter. Mexico City, Joe, that's for you. And then I think about the Albert Pike Memorial that came down, because President Trump just had it restored. Albert Pike was a Confederate general. I won't go on about him. So it's been a part of a struggle over how we understand our country, is what I would argue. And it makes people very nervous. And this man, Christopher Rufo, has been one of the architects against the university system, because he says professors have been infecting their kids, and that we can't understand all of the protests against the murder of George Floyd in 2020. We don't understand how the universities have been infecting young people with anti-Semitic beliefs, with critical race theory and the like. And it's very jarring for me to hear things like that. And he has learned from the civil rights movement how to attack the money, right? So you go after the funding, you go after what the universities really need, and make them compromise or worse. So I would posit, however, it's not the professors. The professors are part, we definitely have these conversations. I teach politics. How can we not have these conversations? But there are many, many more people at the grassroots who are also, again, as I said, doing some soul searching, like Reverend Lou Sneed. He's now a very good friend of mine. He and his wife, Michelle, live in Georgetown, Texas, which is right outside of Austin. It's like the conservative counterpoint to the liberal Austin, Williamson County. And there's a huge Confederate monument on the public square in Georgetown. And that's how I met him, because he has been, so far unsuccessfully, part of a movement to try to remove the monument. But it's still very much there. But it's people like Lou who've done some real self-work and then wrote this book, Confessions of a Recovering Racist. That's exceedingly helpful. And he gives talks in many places. Yeah, he's a retired UU minister. And then there are people like counter-monument artists, like these anonymous artists recently. I don't know if you've seen these images that, they're called flash mob monuments. They're only there for a little while and then they get removed. And they quote from our president, and this one is a quote from Putin, right? President Trump's a very bright and talented man. And then, of course, this one with Jeffrey Epstein, and this one they took down and damaged it, and ironically that meant that the anonymous artist took that to court and won, and they've democratized this monument because they put their blueprint up on the web, so any place, anyone can reproduce this monument. Yes, and then this one, which is very hard, is also putting Trump behind a memorial about sexual assault. This, yes, comes from Mexico. A 9-ton Olmec head crushes a Tesla. That's a powerful. I'm always intrigued by provocative, monumental, or memorial art. This is from France. And then, of course, we have the project of the Equal Justice Initiative and Brian Stevenson in Montgomery, Alabama. And that's been a very powerful, like the National Museum of African American History and Culture, this has a museum, the Legacy Museum, that takes you in similar ways, but without an uplifting narrative at the end. In the National Museum of African American History and Culture, you go in and you start with the transatlantic slave history and all of the ugliness and brutality. And you're literally climbing up, taking the escalator, and as you ascend in that museum, you are seeing the transcendence of brutality, the uplift narrative, artists and intellectuals and athletes, all of these incredible Black heroes are what ends your story at the National Museum in the Smithsonian. That's not the case at the Legacy Museum. It's very much a museum of memory that also starts from slavery and then takes you through the history of racial terror and lynching and Jim Crow, and ends with mass incarceration to try to get people to really understand the costs of having ignored and tried to work through toward racial equality. So this national memorial, it's known as the Lynching Museum, because all of those hanging stela represent a county, mainly in the South, but there's also one for Port Jervis, New York, where in 1892, Robert Lewis was lynched in broad daylight in front of 2,500 people in Port Jervis, and there's a stela there, but people in Port Jervis have been organizing as the Friends of Robert Lewis to come to terms with that and to hold memorial ceremonies and do educational work, and they're now working with EJI because the Equal Justice Initiative has a duplicate stela for each one that's hanging. They have stela on the ground, and they're waiting for the different counties to come and retrieve them and place them locally in their counties. So Port Jervis, New York is trying to work through that possibility. So I would argue it's not just the universities, it's K through 12 teachers, it's facilitators who are working with students who are really doing the kind of socialization that we would hope would make us a better America. And then this comes from Celebrating the African Spirit, a group that I'm deeply ensconced in, and we were co-founded. It's Black-led and interracial and multi-generational, mainly made up of elders, because those are people who care about history the most. And we work to commemorate enslaved Africans and their descendants to the building of Poughkeepsie and its surrounds, because you can grow up in New York and have no idea how important slavery was to the state of New York, or that Alexander Hamilton, when he signed New York State into the United States, in Poughkeepsie, by the way, he did that, he signed in as a slave state, New York, even though there had been a very thick debate about it. You know, even he was on the side that said, well, we have to manumit and take it gradually. So New York did not abolish slavery until 1827. So it was a good 7 years, and even after that, there were young people who were indentured servants after 1827. It's a sad story, a sad history that I knew nothing about, having grown up in Texas and always been very defensive teaching in New York about the history of the South. So I'm very, we started in 2019, then COVID hit, so we went on Zoom, and today, on Juneteenth this past summer, we inaugurated our first memorial marker. It was designed by Poughkeepsie High School students working with a professional group of graphic designers and a renderer, fourth state metal fabricators that are fantastic. And today we have a 9.5-foot memorial in Warriors Park, right on the river. And if there's time, I'd love to show you a couple of minute clip. I don't know if I should do that or we should open it up. I know I've talked a long time. What do you say, Joe? Show the video. I think it's a beautiful video. It's 4 minutes, but you'll recognize some of the people in it, I think.
Do you know how to do it? I don't.
He did. Dave, did he? Oh, he left. He's gone. Well, it might be too hard.
It might be. We can't even.
Let's see. If I get out of this, I probably do see where I can. Let me see if I can do it. There it is. Okay. Okay. How do I move this? Oh. Yeah, it's a little bit illogical. Now that I can see, but I don't know how. And I want you just to see half.
There are no blacks on Market Street. Nothing.
Oh, sorry, I work with a Mac. This is a, oh shoot. Well, it's a nice uplifting video that I wanted to end on, so it's not all doom and gloom.
To touch, allowing the evocation of spirits, the echoes of souls, blacks and Quakers who were murdered here, who rallied here, in the name of freedom here. Run north to freedom.
I'm just trying to move over to make it bigger, but.
Run north to freedom. Freedom,
Yeah,
freedom,
just
freedom.
move it over without losing.
Today is really a tribute to people's creativity, dedication, and love for the truth.
Celebrating the African spirit in recognition of the memorial marker unveiling here today,
Scott
Ryan
Ryan,
Park,
right? You can't see
honoring
his
the
head.
history and legacy
Well, this is
of
too
enslaved Africans in the Hudson Valley, ensuring this history is not forgotten.
It's fitting that we are unveiling it today on Juneteenth because it is
Our
a
mayor of the city of Poughkeepsie, Yvonne Flowers. Oh dear, well, I bombed on this, I can't quite control it.
You can give me, and
Yes,
I can
I'll
put it
send
on
it.
this.
I'll send it. Up, somebody who seems to know. I mean, I see where I wanna go, but I can't get there without cutting it off.
If you go to the bottom,
Yes.
you had a different set of choices.
Yeah. Well, listen, I will trust, I can share, and I really would love to make you all promise me you'll take a look at the Celebrating the African Spirit website. We're a great group. You'll appreciate our intergenerational. We work with Poughkeepsie High School students primarily to make them the ambassadors of history. So. All right, so I'm gonna stop because I've talked a long time, and let's open it up to your thoughts,
Okay,
questions.
I've got the mic, so I'm gonna take advantage. I have a pretty basic question. What practical difference does it make when people know the history versus when they don't? Practical difference.
I think, I mean, there are different levels of knowing and knowing. I think that ignorance, particularly white ignorance, has cost us a lot, so that when we see some current injustice, we have a kind of background context to understand where that's coming from. And the opposite has happened in the United States. I mean, I'm sure you all are familiar with other countries that have done so much better to come to terms with their violent past, including Germany, I would argue. Now, that wasn't easy at all. Germans resisted for the first 20 years post the Holocaust, but they have a very rich, demanding platform now, curriculum for their K through 12 kids, memorials everywhere. It's impossible to grow up in Germany and not know what happened and try to think about the deep atrocities and how we never want to go there again. It's not a guarantee. Most of my work is about the activists themselves, the people who are on the ground, who are either advocating to put a memorial up that tells an alternative truth and struggle and loss, or those trying to take down the glory of the Confederate monuments. what I have seen is it's not just that we don't teach it, it's that we erase. I never liked that term, that we erase the past. I don't know that that's possible, but I've seen it too much. Intentional burying violences. I see it a lot in the lynching stories in Texas and elsewhere, where it became embarrassing that there were so many white citizens who would gather as if it were a picnic, or were picnicking during a lynching. And then it goes out into the national press. This happened in 1915 and 1916 and 1922, with the return of the KKK in a big way. But local, the city leader said, oh, this is not good press for us, this lynching. We don't want it going out in the nation. So it was buried, and I did a chapter for my book on it, on a particular lynching in Waco, Texas. And it just was so shocking for the people who organized it, who they themselves knew nothing about this history. Or Sherilyn Eiffel, who was the civil rights attorney who led the NAACP Legal Defense Fund for a number of years. She's a Vassar grad, we love to claim her, from 1984. And her book on the courthouse lawn was when she was a young civil rights attorney in the 80s, and she was investigating a recent injustice in Maryland. And she discovered that in this town in Maryland, there had been a terrible lynching. And Black people didn't want to talk about any of it because there was still a lot of fear in this town. And white people didn't want to talk about it because it was this shameful thing, and past is past. We weren't responsible. That's a very common response, So imagine if you had grown up where it was discussed, where you could mourn and grieve and say our community can be better than this, and have those conversations. And I think, I don't think K through 12 can do the whole thing. It's mainly families, loved ones. When you go to a museum, if you go with your grandma or you go with your father, you leave with more knowledge. There's great studies about this. When families go and visit history museums and they talk with one another as they're looking at the displays, it sticks with them, it stays with them. And those conversations were not had for different reasons for different communities, right? And, the United Daughters of the Confederacy was the most visionary national organization in the United States in terms of setting the narrative. Not only, they started as doing funerary memorials for those who had died in the Civil War on the Southern side. That made a lot of sense. Of course you want to remember your loved ones who you've lost. But then they started with the national leaders, Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, all over the South. And they took control of K through 12 textbooks because they came from powerful Southern families. And it wasn't just Southern textbooks, although until 2019, you could grow up in Texas, study the Civil War in 7th grade, 9th grade, and not know that a central reason for the Civil War was slavery. That was until 2019. It was not in a textbook. It was all about states' rights. You could grow up in New York and learn about Robert E. Lee as a West Point graduate and a great man who also, in states' rights terms, wanted to defend Virginia. It was not about the fact that he committed treason or that he was a major slave owner. He'd been a successful student at West Point, but for the good of his home state, he needed to go back to Virginia. And that's how it was taught in New York. And I see kids growing up in New York who assume all of it's a Southern thing and not a national thing. So that was a very long response to your very short question.
Not so short. I don't have to go far.
I'd like to talk about Ulster County. Of course, we have a wonderful statue of Sojourner Truth as a child in slavery, and that statue is visited a lot.
All of you know Anne Gordon. She was very much responsible for that statue in Port Ewan.
Well, and the sculptor is one of our residents here as well.
Oh, she is?
Yes, yes.
Oh, I didn't know that. She's also a Vassar
And a
grad.
Vassar grad.
Yes.
Yes, yes, she had a hard, yeah.
Yes, but I'd also like to talk about New York State after the Civil War, where town after town erected statues to their soldiers who fought. These were memorial statues, not victory statues. And I think the grandest one is in front of the City Hall in Kingston. But every single town of any size who had a chapter of the GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic, the Veterans Organization, put up a memorial in their town to the soldiers they lost in the Civil War. And New Paltz was the first to put up one of these statues, and it's in the cemetery, and it was put up by the wives and daughters to remember the soldiers.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of memorial statuary here.
We do, we do. One of the interesting differences though, Anne, is how you use, the soldiers were memorials, and that's what they should have been.
Yeah.
Whereas the United Daughters of Confederacy call theirs monuments. You would never know they lost, the South lost. It's very intentional and very smart, I think.
I grew up in Virginia, and my grandmother was a member of the UDC.
She was. Yes, yes. Well, and Sojourner Truth, I feel like that was so late, like the Port Ewan Memorial to Sojourner Truth as a little girl was way before any of the other Sojourner Truth recognitions. It was very late in its recognizing, you know.
Yeah, what?
6 years?
Yeah.
Been there 6 times?
No.
You've been here 6 years?
No.
I'm sorry. I want to understand you.
You've noticed in many towns there are pictures on sheets of World War II veterans. Who put them up and who's getting them all over the United States? And why do you think this has happened?
You mean in more recent years it's happening more? Is that what you mean?
Perhaps because I haven't been in the country that long.
I mean, I think war memorials are by far and away the most prevalent memorials of any, right? And I'm not sure the World War II memorials, there are groups of veterans of foreign wars, there are veterans groups and Rotary clubs and Lions clubs that often take responsibility in small towns for raising the funding.
Yes, but they're all the same
Design.
The-
It's like what Anne was
that
saying.
someone nationally is doing this.
Yes,
And
yes,
may be paid locally, but
yes, you
the
can order them.
the sameness
Yeah.
suggests something else.
In terms of, are they figurative, or are they, they're funerary, their names, the
Their-
names?
Their names and
Yeah.
their pictures.
Yes, well, yes, I mean, it's not unusual for war memorials to be pretty uniform and for particular companies to become very big with a particular design that then communities buy. I mean, that's very common. It was like what Anne was talking about, there was a company for the Civil War statues for soldiers where they would just dress them up differently. There were the Confederate ones and the Union ones, right? They had two different uniforms, but they were essentially the same. But the putting the names, I mean, I'm very sympathetic to wanting to name your loved ones and have the names. And I think Maya Lin also understood the power of being able to recognize your loved one's name in a memorial. And communities that could recognize a family name even if they didn't know the person who was lost. So I think that's a very common practice.
I see Trina Green in the door. Come on in, Trina.
Oh, hello.
She's the one who did the sculpture I'm talking about.
Hello, it's nice to meet you. Yes, I know your work. I know your work. Well, Anne brought up your Sojourner Truth little girl memorial in Port Ewing. Yeah, that was what we were talking
And
about.
I also have,
In Kingston, the one I've
in
seen.
Kingston from the municipal.
Yes, I've seen that one as well. Yeah. Yeah, and I was saying it's very late that we recognize Sojourner Truth in Ulster County. To me, that speaks volumes, and how she was also, until like the last minute, left off the suffragist memorial in Central Park. You know, in Central Park, it was only very recent that we had a real woman represented in Central Park. Until like 3 years ago, it was Alice in Wonderland was the only female character. It was all these men. And then with the 100th anniversary of the women's right to vote, there's a new sculpture there. But originally it was Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. They didn't have Sojourner Truth there. And then fortunately there was an outcry, and somehow she ended up as a third woman.
Just a brief comment that there has been a sea change in the kind of representation there is now of soldiers. In the past, it was all a very heroic mold, often on horses or whatever. But now it's the men themselves who fought, being shown wounded and in a state of exhaustion, the realities of the war.
Why do you think that is?
Why do I think that is? A more honest approach to understanding what war is all about, and acknowledgement by the leaders as well.
And where have you seen that?
On Fifth Avenue, near the zoo, on 63rd, maybe something like that. There's one of the wounded soldiers, and locally not in Beacon, across the river, in Newburgh, exhausted soldiers leaning on others, wounded. The reality of what fighting is all about.
Thank you for that. You know, the one that the place where I've seen the most, and they're very large, that again speaks to the power of the United Daughters of the Confederacy, is in Gettysburg. For a long time, the United Daughters of the Confederacy couldn't do much in Gettysburg, but they were given some permissions beyond having Robert E. Lee there. And they have these, if you have a chance to look at Gettysburg memorials, monuments, you can see these literally larger than life, agonizing Southern soldiers, Mississippi, Louisiana. And again, in that context, because I'm a political scientist, I agree with you that showing the agony from war is important. In that political context, I'm convinced it's about showing a moral equivalency between North and South. You know?
And there's one more memorial, in front of the municipal building in Kingston.
Yeah.
There are slabs of all the people from the Kingston area or Ulster County who died in the Revolutionary War, who died in the Civil War,
Yeah.
etc. But the monument in the middle is a helmet and like a rifle supporting the helmet, a beat up helmet, and a pair of beat up shoes at the bottom. And in the middle is nothing, which is very, very powerful.
Poignant, yeah. So that
Where is
goes
that?
You're in front of the Kingston Court.
Municipal building.
Oh, in front of the municipal building.
Across from the old Dutch church.
Yes, where the DMV is. Yeah.
Other questions?
So I
It's
want
always
to know,
an
can I
art
ask a
form.
question?
Yeah, you can ask a
I mean, I
question.
want to ask you why memorials matter, or if they don't. I mean, I just threw down the argument that they're taken very seriously because they tell a symbolic story of the nation, for better and for worse. And they matter in that way, even if we walk by a lot of them.
Just talking about memorials that matter, I'm going to go outside the country.
Yeah.
And some of you may have seen this in Budapest. The shoes alongside the river, and people know what I'm talking about. That was one of the most powerful images that I've ever seen of, would you call that a monument or a memorial? A memorial, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so they're shoes just along the river.
Sculptured shoes.
Yeah, yeah, sculptured shoes of, I think, children who
Yeah.
were lost during World War II.
World War II.
And it's absolutely incredibly powerful.
Well, again, to me, one of the fascinating questions always is, what is the staying power of a monument or memorial? Because we can't really know. And for the Vietnam National Memorial, I think many of us from our generations find it a very powerful, moving memorial. But when I ask my college students now, you know, they're polite about it, but they don't quite get it. They don't quite get why that was so powerful. And they always ask me, well, where are the Vietnamese? Yeah, I mean, they're bachelor students, like, that's what they go after, you know? Yeah. Because there were over a million.
I think that one of the most affecting memorials I've ever seen was in Vietnam.
Yeah.
It was in a village in Vietnam, and there was a plaque on the wall and had the names of all the men in the village who had been killed by the Americans during the American War.
Yeah.
And then there was a second plaque on the wall, and it was the name of all the mothers who had lost all of their sons in that war.
That's very powerful. I was in Vietnam. I don't know if you asked this. I went not for memorials, but I remember asking someone. I just assumed as someone from the United States, I wouldn't be popular. They said, "Oh no, we won." They said to me in Vietnam. That was what the Vietnamese said. But the same man said, "Yeah, my house was destroyed. My family evacuated. I lost people." But we're more worried, they said, about the Chinese, because it is the neighboring imperial power for them. So that was very illuminating. And thank you for sharing that. The mothers. Because it's the mothers who lead some of the memorials, and then, yeah, the mothers who are left behind. Any other favorite memorials or arresting memorials?
So subtle.
In Salem, Massachusetts,
Oh.
there's a phenomenal statue right on the town green of the man who founded Salem, Roger Conan. And it's just such a powerful piece of work. He's wearing a cloak that swirls around him and one of those Puritan hats, and he's got it's just a great piece of art.
Yeah. Well, I think about the first time it was when I was taking my kids who were very little to Massachusetts to Plymouth Rock. And my image in my head of what Plymouth Rock would be and what it is was such a shock. I assumed it was a big rock, you know, Plymouth Rock. It's like this big, I mean, it's
Overgrown pebble.
I was really taken by that. Yeah, I mean, again, the point is, how much do we as human beings engage with some of these? And the reason that Brian Stevenson, who's this, you know, incredible thinker, MacArthur Genius Awardee, civil rights attorney in Montgomery, Alabama, who founded the Equal Justice Initiative to defend people who were wrongly convicted or poorly represented legally who were on death row in Alabama. But he's had over 100 people taken off death row. It's a public interest law firm that he has. And yet he came to the conclusion, particularly after visiting places in the world like Berlin's monument to the murdered Jews, that he could maybe rescue one by one people who had been wrongly convicted or poorly represented. But until we change the whole narrative, we will continue to fight these little injustices one by one, and that's why he spearheaded the Legacy Museum and the Memorial to Peace, the National Memorial to Peace and Justice on lynching. And it's very powerful for me as a white woman to be, I've visited 3 times, I guess, but to be standing there as a person, a white woman next to people of color, African Americans, in a space of lynching, and what that does, again, who you were with, and what it evokes. It's just very powerful, and very important, very important.
Is this the monument where you have steel plates, heavy steel plates?
Hanging, yes,
Yes.
yes, I showed an image of it a little bit earlier, yeah, yeah.
Are there any other questions? One more question we have time for. Okay. Katie, thank you
Well,
so
thank
much.
you.